honorable ministers, distinguished guests, friends, let me at the outset differ with the dear lady who brought me onto the stage. I do have a degree from the London School of Economics, but I did not complete my master's. I had 8 months of work to do so. I was faced with my father's sudden demise, and hence I returned to Sri Lanka to carry on with the social service activities which my father implemented. So pardon me for that correction. Well, it's very encouraging to have a distinguished audience today, and I shall strive to provide all of you all with an overall overview of my thinking in general terms as far as governance is concerned, and I shall move on to the specific topic of new media, the challenges, future prospects, and the vision that we have formulated in order to attain the highest goals as far as this new medium is concerned. Let me at the outset provide you with a synopsis of the system of government, the methodology of governance which I envisage in a new modern Sri Lanka. Now, friends, if we are to prosper as a nation state, I fervently believe that prosperity is predicated upon fulfilling 4 essential prerequisites. First, I believe the necessity to establish decision-making structures that promote sound decision-making, which ultimately results in positive policy resultants. Then through that process, we can move on to identify the national priorities to be incorporated in the governance agenda. Thirdly, we should ensure the fast-tracked implementation, time-targeted policy implementation in terms of the policies that we have formulated. Lastly, it is most essential that we have a thorough monitoring and feedback on the various policy initiatives, its successes and failures. If we look at the various decision-making approaches that most world leaders have followed, if I may give you a few examples, how US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought out his country out of the Great Depression in the 1930s through the New Deal. John F. Kennedy, through his New Frontier program. L.B. Johnson, in initiating the Great Society program, Reaganomics in the 80s, one can come to a conclusion of a common thread that was prevalent in the decision-making process. The process was structured, it was rational. On most occasions, meritocracy gained primacy over other considerations. Specialists, generalists, experts, research-based think tanks provided the main policy inputs, and the policy resultants were a product of thorough analysis, information assimilation, scrupulous examination of facts and details. Now, why I'm talking about the processes is because my experience in the last decade in Sri Lankan governmental policy formulation is far different from the policy-making models that were adopted by the great leaders of the world. Ours is a system which is primarily ad hoc, personality and cult-driven, disjointed, haphazard, and the consequences of such a process are policy resultants that are detrimental to the national interest of our country. So I think, first and foremost, it is imperative that we establish a coherent decision-making structure when deciding on national priorities and when determining the national agenda. The state of the decision-making apparatus, I must say, has a direct correlation to the productiveness of the policy resultants. Now, having said that, if we look at the spectrum of policies that a government and a nation state enunciates, broadly it can be categorized into economic policy and social policy. Now, when we talk of economic policy, in the present day, I believe there is a structural crisis in the social strata. This structural crisis is a result of skewed, prejudicial economic policies that have favored one particular sector of society while ignoring the rest in total. I firmly believe in the model of shared prosperity and inclusive growth. As macroeconomic targets, we should aim at low inflation, minimal unemployment, high exports, low budget deficits, debt reduction, achieving high national disposable income, maximization of the utilization of scarce resources, high foreign direct investment. Now, these are some of the macroeconomic objectives that we have to achieve if Sri Lanka is to be economically great. How do we do this? Well, there are a number of models and theories which a variety of decision makers espouse. On the one hand, you have the Keynesian aggregate demand management model, and at the other extreme, you have the typical free market, Fred Hayek, Milton Friedman, neoliberal economic model. But I believe what's most suited to our country is a mixture of these two models which possess the major attributes in spurring economic growth. We are all cognizant of the pivotal role played by the small and medium-term entrepreneurs being the engine of economic growth. And we should strive a plethora of stimuli to ensure that we harness all resources, use and utilize policies, tools and instruments to ensure that we gain economic prosperity by supporting the SME sector. As a country, we need to have geographically targeted policy approaches. I'm reminded of the Thatcher policies in the 1980s. It was well known as the enterprise zone policy. A similar model was followed during the presidential tenure of my late father, the garment factory program, which distinguished and demarcated geographically the areas according to their economic circumstances. If we are to progress, if we are to develop and thrive in the international economy, we have to follow the export-based economic development model. And when it comes to growth, I fervently believe that the greatest value addition you achieve is from growth based on manufacturing. This has been proven to be the case during the 80s and 90s. And if you observe the progress made by the Asian tigers, the Asian economies, in the late 90s and early year 2000, manufacturing-based industrial development and economic growth has proven to be the most sustainable economic growth that one can achieve. If I may move on to the social policy aspect, we have to attain the highest standards, and through a strong and vibrant social policy in the health, education, agricultural, irrigation sectors, women's development, road infrastructure, transportation and highways, and most importantly, as far as the youth are concerned, we have to have innovative strategies, new approaches, so that we are able to achieve the highest standards in the policy programs in each of those specific areas. If I may come up with an example, in the youth sector, we are planning on establishing a youth charter with adequate parliamentary enactments which would give legal teeth. And we also propose the establishment of a national innovation fund, a national startup fund to support the talented, capable youth who are keen on starting up new ventures and who are instrumental in formulating innovative strategies in terms of business practices are concerned. We hope to provide them with the requisite seed capital and the funds and the resources that are required to promote innovation, to promote business startups, and thereby make the youth of our country partners in the country's progress and prosperity. So basically, I gave you that particular overview with a specific issue in mind. Today we are talking of new media, innovations, artificial intelligence, modern technological approaches for solving problems. All this gamut of ideas have to be translated into action. We are all too familiar with the sizable gap that exists between declaratory policy and action policy. We have seen many a grandiose program announced, given huge media publicity, but at the end of the day, the implementation of these ideas are very much stagnant, or they're implemented at tortoise pace. So I think in governance, formulation of the policy imperatives are vital. Such formulations should be rational, should be to the benefit of the nation's interest, and such policies have to be implemented through a time-targeted approach. Let me move on to the topic of the day, new media. Now, prior to examining the issues related to new media, let's look at one of the series of issues, specifically economic issues, which we face right now, and how modern technology, innovative techniques and methods, new media, and various other innovative approaches can be utilized to ensure that we come out of these difficult circumstances? Well, friends, we all know that as a country, we are facing a huge debt trap. All of us are quick to point out, at most times, the per capita income levels in our country. But if one examines the per capita indebtedness, I believe approximately it amounts to around 575,000 per head to date. So as a country, we are embroiled in a debt trap. In addition, we are also faced with the challenges of a middle income trap. Third, a large portion of our country are struggling with the poverty trap. So with all these traps, one has to design and devise modern policies that are relevant, that are applicable, then that would cater to resolving these plethora of problems that we face as a country. When we define new media, it's popularly described as internet and various applications that run on platforms that connects multiple producers of content to multiple readers and viewers, such as Facebook. That's just a rough definition of new media. And one of its major virtues is the creation of platforms that connect suppliers of goods and services. And it also creates increased connectivity among stakeholders and people in society. If I may go back to the 80s, I remember during my school days, even at that time, most of the multinational enterprises had technological advancement as the main theme that guided their business operations. I remember the phrase Vorsprung der Technik, a slogan that was adopted by the Audi car manufacturers. It meant progress through technology. And that's a phrase that is more relevant than ever in the present context today. So as a government, I believe in this new era, in this modern milieu, we should harness the potential of emerging technologies to improve and empower the lives of Sri Lankans. Through a focused, government-championed digital empowerment program, we can reach the highest levels of, quote, digital prosperity. International society is on the cusp of a revolution encompassing modern digital technologies, which overcomes time, distance and space, constraints and limitations. Therefore, friends, as a government, we should actively intervene to establish electronic payment platforms promote e-commerce and e-governance, train small businesses to use new media, ensure 4G, 5G universal coverage, promote stability in the tax structure that has a direct relationship to inward investments, while recognizing the beneficial aspects of new media. One has to take recognition of possible detrimental impacts of the actions of certain outliers in society. We should be aware of propagation of false and defamatory information. We should strive to prevent hate speech. Certainly, as a national priority, we have to account for the national security imperatives. Having said that, I do not believe on the policy of collective punishment meted out to all for the actions of a few. Therefore, I believe we have to have a rapid takedown approach and appropriate, proportionate punishments meted out to those who break the law. And also, I think we have to pay attention to data protection instruments that have to be enacted in order to protect privacy of individuals in our country. Friends, let us for a moment look at the present state of affairs as far as Sri Lanka is concerned in the digital indices. When one examines these indices, it is quite apparent that we are lagging as a country, as a partner in the digital revolution that is taking place in the whole world. Let us for a moment look at the percentages of internet users in Malaysia and Thailand. For every 100 people, in Malaysia 80%, in Thailand 53% are internet users, whereas our numbers are quite low compared to those two countries. If we look at the figures in the ICT Adoption Pillar 3 of the Global Competitive Index, in most of those indicators, we lag far behind. When we look at smartphone ownership in our country, it is 54% among the 15 to 65-year-olds, which is a small number compared to the rest of the world. Just 37% of Sri Lankans make use of the internet. There are issues of limited skills, lack of digital literacy, low awareness, and at times relatively unaffordable services. Furthermore, if I may give you some more figures as far as contribution of ICT to Sri Lanka's exports. In 2016, it was a mere 5%. But when we look at Malaysia, Malaysia accounted for 1.1% of the world's share of telecommunications exports, while Thailand amounted to 1.7%. While these figures depict a somewhat pessimistic situation as far as ICT issues are concerned, we can be encouraged by the achievements, the moderate achievements over the past 10 years. It has expanded by 300%. And we have reached US dollars 1.2 billion in export revenue. Up to now, we have employed 80,000 professionals and contributing 12% to Sri Lanka's services exports. So I think when one looks at these facts and figures, we are behind. However, there's potential. But this potential can only be realized by an interventionist, proactive government strategy which provides ample amount of inducements, encouragement, support in terms of infrastructure. The other day I was consulting with some experts about the possibility of establishing information communication technology learning centers that are of international standard and excellence throughout the country at a divisional secretary level, which would amount to 332 such centers. In addition, those ICT centers will also provide the opportunity for the people of Sri Lanka of all ages to obtain the requisite English literacy skills that are of international standards. So in each divisional secretary area, we will have a center of excellence that is of international standard, which will educate the people of Sri Lanka on both ICT and English literacy and linguistic skills. As a country, there are two more indicators which we have to be aware of in terms of encouraging business, investment, and promoting innovation. The World Bank's Doing Business Index ranks Sri Lanka 100th out of 190 countries. The comparative figure for Malaysia is 15. The ranking is 15. And for Thailand, it's 27. When one looks at performance on the innovation efficiency ratio measured by the Global Innovation Index, Sri Lanka ranks 88th out of 126 countries. So in conclusion, let me reiterate the fact that technology-led innovation is the engine of growth in building a new Sri Lanka. This major national objective will be pursued with great vigor, speed, and dedication. I invite you all to become partners, stakeholders, and active participants in this technology-led nation-building program. Together, we shall embark on this path-breaking journey, and we shall, with all our efforts and dedication, fulfill the aspirations of the modern-day youth of our motherland, a technologically empowered motherland, leading the world in high-tech innovation, robotics, and artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think with your speech, you have answered many of the questions that our audience has posed here. They've all been busy writing things down while you were talking. I think some of the questions perhaps may have been related to your own speech as well. Friends, I now have this very unpopular task of, as you can see, I have received this many questions. You have really been busy. I have the unpopular task of choosing a few from amongst these, and I think the team behind the scenes have also been helping me. What I can assure you is that we have tried to find a lot of questions were common, so wherever we found similarities, we decided we chose one question that kind of summed up those few. And what I can assure you is that most of these questions, all of these questions, will be taken on by Honourable Minister Sajith Premadasa's team, and he will address you with the use of new media. He will address some of your concerns and questions. All of these are very valid and they are accepted. But for the purpose of this discussion, I am going to call out a few names and a few questions. If you're ready, sir? Yes, okay. Right. Right, the first question we have is from Purna Fernando. Yes, there we are. So Purna is asking this question. How can new media, social media, be used for developing and transforming Sri Lanka?
May I know who the question is? Right. Well, it's a mere reiteration of what I stated in my speech. I think new media is a path-breaking new developmental paradigm, which, if used for constructive, progressive purposes, it can play a pivotal and indispensable role in generating prosperity to our motherland. I personally do not want to misguide all of you by trying to pretend that I'm an expert in the information communication technology subject. What is most important is to gather groups of experts in this particular subject area. Those who have attained standards of highest excellence, form them into policy-making groups which will engage and embark in initiating and formulating innovative policies, policies that may have worked universally, policies that may have been successful in individual countries. But whatever models that we adopt, we have to keep in mind that it should suit local demography and local context. So I am very positive in the progressive contribution that new media can make in generating prosperity and wealth to Sri Lanka, for all Sri Lankans.
I hope that answers your question, Purna. Now, on to the next one. This is from Sajith Premadasa. And Jivak asks, you have talked about fourth industrial revolution. What can we expect, when can we expect the government to provide lower data plans and internet for all? I think the question itself deserves a round of applause.
May I know who the question is? Is he around? Okay. Now you can understand why, prior to talking about new media, I commenced my speech with regard to the policy-making processes and time-targeted implementation. I mentioned in my speech the huge discrepancy that exists between policy pronouncements and policy announcements and its actual implementation. So however much you come up with unique policy initiatives, it has to be and it must be implemented with a time-targeted plan. Now, if I may prove to you a particular project that I have embarked upon, that is in the housing sector, shelter for all by 2025. Now you have to understand, I have embarked on this project with huge limitations. The first limitation is, this is not the housing ministry that was during the Premadasa era. Due to the political exigencies in the latter part of '94, this ministry was broken into 6 parts. Right now, housing in Sri Lanka is handled by 6 ministries. If you want me to elaborate, I can do so. But I think most of you all know. But even then, we have targeted 2025 as the year to provide shelter for all. We have identified 4 different programs. The first program is the construction of 2,500 model villages. Second, 5,000 by January 1st, 2020. Third, 10,000. And last, 2,500. Of course, the first 2,500 consist of single-storied houses, whereas the second, third, and fourth, we will be embarking on a unique housing development model where in each of the land slots we will have the model village houses that will be going vertical. So each plot will consist of 3 subunits which will be going vertical. So I just mentioned these numbers because right now we have achieved our first target. So what I have espoused, what I have announced, what I have declared, what I have proclaimed, it's there on the ground now. Right now, we have surpassed 2,500 model villages. In fact, it's 2,553 model villages. And our target date was end September. Why I say that is there is no divergence between what I declare and my action policy. They are very much congruent. They go hand in hand. So when you're talking of providing broadband, right? Data plan and broadband services, yeah, sure, you will after our revolutionary victory in November or December, you will see a time targeted. I'll try to be modest, but you will see a clear-cut plan, targeted plan, and there will be politicians and government personnel who will be responsible and accountable in achieving those plans. So those who achieve will be promoted. Those who are not up to the task, I'm sorry, they will certainly be demoted. So we will have a surgical approach to governance. It will be results oriented. It will be there to be seen. You will see it with your own eyes. You will hear it with your own ears. And certainly you will feel it in your heart.
Victory for us indeed if all of these are going to happen, and we are pretty sure that it will. The next question is from Madisha Pereira. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct. So your question is, you have done a lot of work in rural areas. What are your thoughts on urban revival?
May I? Okay. Because I love to answer while, looking at you direct. So pardon me for searching for you. I generally like to look right in the eye and answer. Yes, I think urbanization process is a process that has to be delicately managed, and we have to ensure that we try to focus on developing the periphery so that the influx of people coming into particular population centers does not result in the overpopulation of that particular area. So I think as far as urbanization is concerned, there are a multiplicity of urbanization development models in a lot of countries. Singapore is a very valid model. But however, when we talk of various models and approaches, as I said before, we have to be cognizant of the local circumstances and the local context when we implement it. And I, for one, would encourage and promote the development of the peripheral areas so that there is a managed urbanization process that takes place in the periphery where you won't see thousands and hundreds of thousands of people coming in to various popular population centers. So I think urbanization is a very sensitive subject area which has to be handled with great care and acumen.
Thank you. I can feel the intensity in the room. It's, heating up a little. I can feel everyone sort of, will my question get picked? Or, when will I get the answer to my question? You will. If it doesn't happen...
I hope the questioners don't eat me up.
I'm not so sure about that, sir, but let us see. So the next question we have is... on transparency and corruption. This question is from Kishan Palihakkar. Here we go. So Kishan's question is, how can new media help with transparency and control of corruption?
Well, I think the role that new media has already played in exposing the various indiscretions, that's a diplomatic word, corrupt activities, transgressions. It's laudable, the role that new media has played, but I would try to state that it's very important that such exposures are based on substance, fact, and evidence, rather than on speculation, character assassination, and innuendo. That is most important. Fact-based investigative exposures would be a very refreshing phenomena in Sri Lankan society. When I was a student in the United Kingdom, there were two investigative programs, of course, in the traditional media. If I remember correct, both were on BBC. One was Panorama, and the other was World in Action. Later, if I remember correct, Channel 4 News also commenced their various investigative programs. Now, by and large, most of those programs which were investigative based their reports, deductions and conclusions on fact, not on fiction. So I think if the same approach is adopted by the practitioners of new media, I think it would be a thoroughly refreshing new tool available to all of us. Well, not ourselves, I mean certainly the people of the country as a whole. And it will act as a necessary check and balance to ensure that misgovernance or misdeeds do not occur. Now, I think new media can always utilize various instruments and tools which are now at their disposal. Specifically, one of the revolutionary parliamentary legislations, the Right to Information Act, RTI. I think it was a novel approach to promoting democracy. And also, if I remember correct, in recent times, the Speaker of the Parliament has permitted the live telecasts of the various parliamentary investigative committees that examine and go into the various actions of the executive branch. So I think there are many an opportunity right now, and I think we should allow greater freedom and greater mobility in terms of permitting the new media to investigate issues. But I hasten to add, investigations, conclusions and deductions not based on innuendo or fiction, but based on substance.
Thanks. Our audience today is a very good representation of society, I think. We have questions here from civil society organizations, youth representatives, from business organizations, from various chambers, and so on. And like I said earlier, all of your questions will be taken on board. But I have the last three in my hand, I think. So quickly on to the next one. This one is from Yasmin Premanath. Okay. Yasmin Premanath, she's over there. Her question is, what are your thoughts to promote startups in digital technology era?
I think I mentioned the fact that we as a government, the future government, we would like to prioritize and enhance the attention that is given to the new business startup programs. And I mentioned in my short presentation the establishment of a new startup fund and the establishment of a fund that encourages and promotes new innovations. So certainly we will strive to achieve those goals and to ensure that we as a country encourage the youth and the rest of the citizenry of our country to innovate, to promote critical thinking, think anew, not restrict yourself to a traditional framework, but think out of the box and come up with new ideas and new programs that would be beneficial and helpful for the future progress of our country.
Thank you for that. The next question is from Tushara Vikramaratna. Tushara Vikramaratna, where are you? There you are. So his question is, Sri Lankans have excelled in exporting software. And what is your thought in developing cyber hubs in Sri Lanka?
Certainly, that's the next level to which we should go on. I think as far as exports are concerned, as a percentage, our contribution is still at a small level. And here again, I think the government should not leave any stone unturned to provide the maximum amount of encouragement and incentives to fulfill this particular purpose. And here again, the suggestion that you make is part and parcel of the digital revolution which we hope to embark upon. And make no mistake, this will be a digital decade. as far as our country is concerned.
On to our last question today. Chandana Veeratunga asks, where is he? There. Chandana Veeratunga asks, how do we ensure that the fake news and negative impact of social media doesn't impact our society and our democracy?
Well, I personally think that rather than putting forward legislative restrictions, I think self-regulation would be the order of the day. If we go to legislate and enact acts of parliament restricting the operation of new media, I think we may be on a slippery slope towards enhancing those restrictions at future dates. Rather, I believe that some mechanism, which I have not thought about, to be very frank, but some mechanism, if it can be formulated within the industry itself, a self-regulating mechanism, whereby, say, for example, the new media community are formed into societies, and those particular societies have their established guiding principles, rules, regulations, limitations. I think self-regulation would be the policy that I would encourage, rather than the government proactively intervening and taking restrictions onto their own hands, where you may be creating a very dangerous precedent, and you might end up going along a slippery slope towards autocracy, dictatorship, and I certainly don't want to do that.
Well done, sir. I think
now,
you
if
have...
I may just interject, we'll give some more opportunity for...
A few more? Okay. A mic over there, please. Yes, okay.
My question is actually based on the same question that the gentleman asked. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I personally think that there has to be some kind of regulation. That self-regulation probably won't work because humans being human. So I'm actually kind of confused. Why would you say self-regulation? Because I mean, just like any other laws have to follow human action. When a new media comes in, I think there should be new regulation. What is your idea on that?
Well, let me just provide you with a bit of a contextual background. What was the pre-2015 situation in our country and the post? Do I need to remind you of the prevailing fear psychosis, extreme limitations and restrictions that were placed upon individuals, people of our country? And there was deliberate attempts at violations of human and civic rights. If I remind you of the fact that we as a government removed criminal jurisdiction, defamation, that were placed upon the media, which was one of the most path-breaking decisions that we made as a government. While one may have inclinations to follow the path of providing legal restrictions, the reservation I have is one might be embarking on a path which could be dangerous, which may end up in the other extreme of imposing severe and harsh restrictions. But I do understand, having personally experienced the wrath of unsubstantiated accusations. But still again, we have to look at the larger picture rather than our personal inclinations, personal proclivities and preconceptions. We have to look at the larger good for all. And I personally think that self-regulation is the order of the day. Yeah, that's what I meant by societies, establish themselves into societies. I'm sorry I differed from your suggestion.
In the interest
I hope you won't keep it against me.
So in the interest of time, unfortunately, we have to wind up.
I have enough time.
Well,
Because I fervently believe in this system of impromptu questions and impromptu answers.
all right.
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Just a small.
I do not need a hearing aid for the moment.
The topic itself talks about new media for a new Sri Lanka.
Excuse me?
The topic itself talks about new media for a new Sri Lanka.
Right.
Now, I think one of the questions that most of us have would be in terms of the billboards, the hoardings, the cutouts that you would see when someone walks down the road. A lot of ministers using these mediums to advertise them, they talk about the projects that we do. There are a number of ways that you could educate people if you're talking about digital mediums and new mediums. So, a UNP government that's hoping to come to power by 2020, what sort of an alternative plan do we have as a party to eradicate this option of polluting the environment with the use of polythene and all these traditional methods of putting cutouts and hoardings? So, I would like to understand what's the futuristic plan that the UNP has in place to eradicate that and then introduce new forms of communication channels and media.
Well, one approach would be to have complete universal digital coverage and provide the necessary facilities to encourage 100% digital literacy. Having said that, I agree with your thinking, but I do not provide answers that are impractical, that may be announced but may not be practiced, as you may have seen through the actions of the past 2-3 weeks. Something was pronounced, but something else was implemented. But I certainly accept your position that more environmentally friendly propaganda approaches, should be used and utilized, and certainly we will look into this aspect very seriously and have a program to address your concern. Your concern is extremely valid.
We can take another question.
As long as they are friendly.
One here.
I said as long as they are friendly.
How can you help SME sectors to get better loan facilities at a reduced rate, which would help in unpredictable situations. Sometimes business are very low, but we have to pay the interest. So if interest rates can be reduced through central bank regulations, which at the moment are not.
The finance minister has enunciated a very productive and attractive program, the Enterprise Sri Lanka program, which does provide access to funds at low rates of interest. And if I remember correct, lower than 6.54%, or at least around those percentages. And I agree that access to resources and access to credit is a vital ingredient in the economic process. If I may just diverge from the topic that you just addressed, we are in the process of formulating a policy proposal for the establishment of a national wealth fund, where all Sri Lankans will be given the freedom to contribute to that fund. And this will be a fund that will not be touched. This is similar to the national wealth funds that exist in the Scandinavian countries. Of course, those funds are nurtured and nourished by oil and petroleum income. But I think looking at our country from a long-term perspective, and you hear a lot of politicians and aspiring politicians talking about, we have to hand over the country in a higher standard for the next generation. I think it's all talk, but very little action or activities to implement that thought. So I'm digressing from the question that you asked, but I do fervently believe that we as a country, it's high time that we had our national wealth fund, which will act as security and act as a kind of a wealth guarantee, which may be used in times and circumstances of national disaster. God forbid, I pray and hope that such won't happen. But it is a good contingency plan and an approach for long-term governance of the country. And certainly through the establishment of a national wealth fund, we will certainly be securing the future of the young generations in our country.
Because this is with the security, the banks are still not providing the 6% or anything, because central bank hasn't given the rules.
Yeah. Sorry, can you please repeat?
Despite giving the security,
right,
the banks are still going at a higher rate because central bank hasn't given the rule to the private banks.
Is this with regard to Enterprise Sri Lanka?
Not Enterprise.
Okay.
SME
now that
loans.
you have come up with an individual problem, if you forward the problem to me, I will act as a facilitator to resolve your issue.
Thank you.
And I will also use your issue as an example, and I'll direct it to the Honourable Finance Minister to exhibit the fact that these types of things also occur. And we will try to take remedial measures at the earliest.
reform presented their report to the Parliament. Do you approve the particular aspect, the provision that they have drafted, proposed for the devolution with regard to the Northeast, especially the North, accepted by the TNA, whatever proposals that were presented to the Parliament with regard to the aspect of power sharing, the administrative power for the province, do you approve that, or do you need more devolution, or do you have constraints of your this thing, or you advocate?
Okay, let me tell you at the outset, my policies and principles are transparent, they are quite apparent, and there will be no divergence. Okay, if I may go back in history, yeah, I'm yet to answer the question. If I may go back a bit in time, you had the hilarious situation where the External Affairs Minister and the then Executive President making various utterances to suit those respective stakeholders and constituencies. I'm sure you vividly remember that there were occasions where the head of state and the External Affairs Minister used to talk about 13 plus when they were abroad. But soon as they came to Sri Lanka, it became 13 minus. Okay? So as far as I'm concerned, my consistent principle is maximum devolution within a unitary Sri Lanka, within a unitary country. That was our policy stance in the 2015 Presidential Manifesto, and it remains to be that. And whatever the provisions that are enacted, please do keep in mind, it has to go through 2/3 of Parliament, and it has to be approved by a 50+1 vote referendum if it is a new constitution, right? So my principle and my belief and my practice would be maximum possible devolution within a unitary Sri Lanka. Now, having said that, if I may move on this topic a bit. Certain constitutions have a unitary character, and we see abroad various other constitutions having a federal character. I mean, if I may say so, the system that you have in the United States, it's a federal constitution. Now, when I talk of a unitary Sri Lanka, I don't mean it to be a mere paper qualification or a constitutional qualification. The unitary Sri Lanka has to be worth the paper it is written on. So when I'm talking of unitary Sri Lanka, people of all religions, of all ethnicities, of all economic, social, and various other backgrounds, they should in their heart of hearts believe in the unitary character. So the mere word unitary Sri Lanka for me would not suffice. We have to educate, we have to initiate processes and legislation or policy instruments, policy tools, whatever, to ensure that in the hearts and minds of all Sri Lankans, they should feel unitary here, not just a paper in which it is written on. In order to do so, we have to eradicate racism from our society. We have We have to fight against discrimination, prejudice. There cannot be pogroms. There cannot be xenophobia. Now, when other sectors, I don't like to use this word minorities, by the way, because we are all citizens of one country. So, when certain citizens of certain sectors, if they feel aggrieved, those grievances should be addressed within a unitary Sri Lanka. Okay? If they feel that they have a series of grievances, those grievances should be addressed through principles of humanism. But the issue of unitary Sri Lanka is non-negotiable.
Honorable Minister, your team has been repeatedly telling me that the time is up. But I am going to ask you how many more questions.
This is my team.
Yes. All right. So how many more questions are we going to take?
I do have to go to Temple Trees by 5.
Right. That would give us 7 minutes. One last question. Over there.
Well, at the outset, you may have heard the word that I do not practice discrimination, but I do believe positive discrimination towards promoting the rights of women in our country. That I fervently believe in. I think focusing on women and focusing on people as a whole, there has to be a purposeful government approach, government intervention. The government should physically champion a progressive program and a project to encourage greater participation in the IT sector. This is why I stated some of the policy tools and instruments that I envisage implementing, providing incentives, providing facilitation. Most important, I truly believe that we have to establish, if we are to become champions of the digital revolution, we have to ensure digital empowerment of the population. And to do so, I think the establishment of ICT centers, centers of excellence, English language centers with language labs. These institutions will play a pivotal role, an indispensable role in ensuring that the whole population become active participants in the digital revolution. So we will include your proposal when we draw up the policy prescriptions for the digital package, that we will have a positive discriminatory approach as far as the majority of the country is concerned, that is 51% of Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Right. Harsha just revealed your credentials.
As I mentioned earlier as well, we do have like a room full of representation from chambers to trade unions to student organizations, youth organizations, etc. And it's a full room of very keenly interested people. We have also noticed a lot of you standing throughout 2.5 hours of standing, and so we've duly noted your keen interest in this subject and in picking the brain of the Honourable Minister. I suggest you take on new media. On the backdrop, you can see sajithfornewsrilanka.lk. That is the website that you can post and share your ideas. You can make your comments, any questions that you have. All of that you can put to practical use, the use of new media, and take on, again, apologies for any of the questions that we couldn't take on today, but please note that all of those will be addressed again through this website. Now, in conclusion, let me invite the Minister of Digital Infrastructure and Information Technology, Honorable Sajith Premadasa. He has been the backbone of this project, and he's a lawyer by profession, but also the minister. And he's trying to bridge his his portfolio of his ministerial portfolio as well as his profession, and trying to find secure and effective ways of communication and the use of new media. So, without further words from me, here's Honourable Minister Sajith Premadasa to deliver the vote of thanks.
Right, Mama, me ගොඩක් වෙලාව ගන්න නෑ වෙලාව 5යි මම දන්නවා මෙතුමා ඊටාම වැදගත් දෙකට පහට ඉන්න ඕනේ තැනක් තියෙනවා ඒ නිසා බොහොම ස්තුතියි හැමෝටම සහභාගී වුණාට thank you very much for participation.
Thank you, everyone. So this is I'm Vimsara Premratna. Thank you for being with us and for your keen interest. Until next time, have a nice day.